Welcome back to Connect and Transform. In this video, I'm going to discuss briefly what the goal is and the major visual elements of the SVG that we're going to be creating. And then we will begin by creating a blank SVG file, and we'll scaffold out some of the basic SVG and scripting elements, including scaffolding out all the functions we need. We won't actually get into coding in this video. That will be for a future video. We're picking up almost where we left off. All I've really done here is I've duplicated one of the existing series, and I modified some of the data in this second chart, which is the bar chart that you see here. And that was just to illustrate that the series are going to display in this manner. So you can see the series name and then a box denoting the color of the series. You can see kind of how in the bar chart the series will appear next to each other. And just for the sake of illustration, I'm going to change the type of this from bar to line. I'll save it and refresh. And so now we see the same exact data, but now it's part of a line chart instead of a bar chart. And back to bar. Okay, so the ultimate goal is something very similar to this. So we're going to display the list of series names and the series colors up here in a box. We're going to have a y-axis with tick marks that extend to both the left and the right of the axis. To the left of the axis will be smaller and black. To the right of the axis will be more subtle and will just serve as kind of a guideline for your eyes. The y-axis will be outside of the data area to the very left edge of the chart. And take note that there is some abbreviation happening here to limit the string length of the y-axis text. So we are abbreviating in this case with, for example, K and M to denote 900,000 or 1 million. There's also an example here in the line chart of having the $sign as the units. There's again some variation in the string length. So when we get to 100, we're not showing the decimal places. And that is just because it was easier to limit the string length than it was to dynamically change the font size. It was a little strange to dynamically change the font size, so that was a decision that I made. So again, I've mostly written the SVG about a month ago, and we're just going to be rewriting it over the course of the next few videos. And then for the x-axis, similarly, we're going to have ticks extending downward that will be darker, and then we'll have x-axis labels. And then in the data area itself, which is a subset of the total area of the graph, there will be different options for, line, area, scatter, bar, stacked bar, etc. And then no matter which data option you choose as far as representation, when you hover over a specific data point, you're going to see a tooltip, as we can see here, with the option of overriding the tooltip with a specific static value. So that's the ultimate goal. So let's get going here. So we're just going to create a new file, new text document. We're going to call it graph.svg. Okay, so that's a new blank file. Now we're not going to open it directly because this file will be embedded by the host HTML file, but I am going to open it in Notepad++ for editing. Okay, in our host file, I'm going to edit the embedding calls to make sure that we're using our new graph.svg file. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now this file is empty right now. So we're going to copy some of the same boilerplate code that we've had in previous videos. So I'm going to copy that SVG root element in. So we have our XML namespace, XMLNS, and it's that boilerplate string. We have XMLNS xlink that is specifically required so that we can access the URL parameters from the host document. So you can see here we're embedding, for example, graph.svg and then passing a parameter ID equals 1. In order for the SVG to be able to read ID equals 1, we need this XMLNS xlink attribute with this boilerplate value. And then we have a width and a height. And because this SVG document is being embedded in a parent document, we also need to set a viewbox attribute in order for it to scale predictably within that parent document. So in this case, we're just setting the viewbox to be equal to our width and height with the X and Y offset of 0. So that is our root element. And then we're going to copy in some basic stuff here. So we know we're going to be using a little bit of CSS to do some styling. So we'll have a style tag. We're going to have some definitions. Okay, and then we're also going to have some XML elements, which we will get back to. And then we're going to have some scripting. Okay, so before we get into scaffolding out our scripting functions, let's look at the actual elements that we're going to need in our graphing SVG. So we're going to have, to start with, a main group. And we're going to say that its ID is graph. And so that's basically going to hold almost everything in our graph except for the tooltips. And that's going to have its own graph, or its own group. And then, so within the group that's going to hold the tooltips, there's going to be a background for the tooltip, and then there's going to be text for the tooltip. So the background is going to be a rectangle. So we're going to have rect. We're going to give it an ID. We're going to call that tooltip underscore BG. X and Y will be 0. Offset, so we're not going to include those. And then we're going to make sure to round the corners. So we're going to give some radius X and Y. And we'll just make it a little bit subtle. 4 and 4 seem like good values. Now we're going to give it a width and a height. And we will be changing this dynamically, but we're just going to give it some initial width and height. So width 55, height 25. We're going to initialize this as visibility hidden. Because we only want it to show when the mouse is hovering. And let's make sure to use the right syntax as attribute equals and then in quotes the value, as opposed to writing it as if you were doing CSS like I almost did. After visibility hidden, we want to fill it with a color. So we're just going to choose like a really dark gray. Okay, so that's our tooltip background. And then for the tooltip text, that's going to be a text element. We'll give it an ID. We'll call that tooltip. And we'll give it a relative X and Y offset so that it's not right in the top left corner of the background. And again, that will be edited in code dynamically depending on the details of the tooltip, how many lines there are, how wide it is, etc. But that's a starting point. And we're also going to initialize visibility hidden. Okay, so this is the entirety of our direct XML that we're not necessarily creating in JavaScript. So now let's look at the scripting and let's scaffold that out. So we're going to have our graph data itself. So we'll just say var graph data equals null to start with. And then we're going to have some initializer to actually kick things off. So that will be a call to load graph data. And then now we get into all of our functions. So we're going to have load graph data as an example function. And that will not need to take any parameters. I'm going to tab all the functions that need work all the way over to the left so that as I'm scrolling in the file, I can easily see what still needs work and what has been completed. So we have load graph data. And then we're also going to have a function to validate graph data. And so this is both going to validate the graph data and it's going to set the default values. So for example, in the previous video, we showed an example where we were not passing the required data. And so it sent a message here, error parsing data. And so that's part of what this function is going to do, is it's going to validate the data. And if the required things are present, then it will go ahead and initialize defaults for anything that's not present. Okay, and then we're also going to need a function to actually initialize the graph. So we're going to call that init graph. And then we're going to have a function to scale the y-axis. Then we're going to have a function to initialize the y-axis called init y-axis. And then similarly, we're going to have one called init x-axis. And then we're going to init the series labels. That's the series names and the squares that show the color of the series. We're also going to have a function init data. So that's where we begin the work of actually creating the visualization. And then here we're going to have init data, but specifically for each type. So for example, we're going to have one for an area chart. We're going to have one for bar, one for bar stacked, one for line, one for scatter, and I think that's probably enough for now for the specific data representations. Okay, then we're also going to have one to init a tooltip. And that's going to take a data node, because remember that the tooltip shows up when you're hovering over something. So we're going to pass that thing in, and that's how we're going to get the specific linkages that we need to show the right thing. And then we also need a specific function to show a tooltip in addition to one that initializes it. So here we're going to be passing the actual event, and then we're going to be passing a data node. And just a few more functions here. So we're going to need a function to show errors. So for example, when we are validating the graph data, if it's missing something required, then we're going to call this show error function, and we'll pass in, for example, the message error parsing data. And that will take a string and we'll call it error message. Okay. And then we just need a couple more functions. So we're going to have one to format an axis value. So this is, for example, doing the formatting on the y-axis over here on the left-hand side. So where we're doing the calculations to append m versus k or g or t or b if we're talking about billions or trillions. This is the function that would handle those specific details. So we're going to format an axis value for a specific data value. So that will be a string called data value. And then lastly, we're going to have a function to format a data value. So similar to formatting an axis value, but slightly different. And the result of this, after we've formatted the data value, that is used in calculating the default tooltip value. So for example, here, the value is 8, and the unit is the $sign, and we can see that the data is being formatted as $8 with 2 decimal places present. And there we have it. So this is a list of all the functions that we're going to create, and once those are created, our graphing SVG will be fully functional, at least to the point that we've defined it so far. Thank you for watching.